Welcome everyone to another video discussion of free answer writing program by Vajiram and Ravi. As we have made the announcement with respect to the end of 2023-24 answer writing program, you do not have to worry about it because we will be restarting the program post prelims. This is the phase where you will be focusing on your prelims exam, and once you're done with that, we will again restart the answer writing program. We are very much overwhelmed with your support. As you can see in the comment section, we are very much grateful that you have been consistent with the answer writing program and given us your support. And at the end, we will also say that through your support, we have understood how to make sure these videos are better. And post prelims, we will be making sure that we'll also keep some strategy sessions to ensure your answer writing practice is holistic in nature. So for today's session, we are going to see GS1 Geography, Human Geography specifically. Let us see the overview of those questions. The very first question is with respect to inland waterways. We are looking at how inland waterways can help with respect to balancing the regional development. For the same, we will see the prospects as well as associated challenges with respect to the development of inland waterways. The second question is with respect to the electrical vehicles. We have seen that how they are disrupting the automobile sector. For the same, we will look for the locations for setting up manufacturing units in India. That's the second question. The third question is with respect to Indian fisheries. We have seen that how there's a paradigm shift where marine dominated fishery is taken a backseat and inland fisheries is now predominant. We are going to see what are the steps taken by the government for the same as well. So this is the overview of the questions that we're going to see today. Let's start with the very first question. Let's read the question together. The revival of inland waterways in India is a new step towards balanced regional development. In this context, analyze the prospects and associated challenges of the development of inland waterways in India. Now let us understand the structuring of the answer. In the introduction, as we are looking at the statement, revival of inland waterways is a new step towards balanced regional development. So over here, you have to focus on inland waterways. At the same time, you have to also think about regional development and how we are going to make balance. So over here, you can talk about the context or you can provide certain data points over here. You can talk about what is the length of inland waterways. At the same time, you can talk about how it directly connects with regional development. In the body aspect, as we have to talk about the prospects, that would be the heading 1, where we'll talk about certain benefits with respect to the inland waterways. And in the heading 2, we will talk about the associated challenges with respect to the development of inland waterways in India. So this is how you are going to structure the body. In the conclusion, we can provide certain proof points as in what exactly government has already done for the same, or you can also talk about certain way ahead points. So that is all for the structuring of question number 1. Let us start with the introduction. So for the context, you can provide that presently there are national waterways, inland waterways in operations, and we have almost 14,500 kilometers of potential inland waterways that can disrupt the entire idea of connectivity. We are looking at regional connectivity and thereby regional development in a balanced way. You can also cite certain kind of recent current affairs where we have seen that how rivers as in inland waterways can help with respect to the realization of Viksit Bharat. You can also talk about it how inland waterways have now changed the way that we trade, and there are surges with respect to the infrastructure development, and for the same, government is also pushing for more funds. So this is something which you can inculcate for your introduction. Let us start with the body. In the heading 1, as the direct demand is with respect to analyzing the prospects, we will list down all the proof points about the benefits of inland waterway for balancing regional development. Firstly, it will decrease the logistic cost. You have to understand that logistic cost in India is almost around 13% of GDP. Now, if we are looking at certain decrease in logistic cost, many benefits can be accrued for the same. Firstly, we can save time. Second, the cost associated with the logistics. And lastly, we can also think about how the trade can also be impacted through development of inland waterways. Second is with respect to employment potential. We have seen that how infrastructure development at any sector can directly augment the employment numbers. So again, for inland waterways, we can provide similar proof points. Next is with respect to connectivity improvement to Northeast region. We have seen how Northeast region we have multiple national waterways, and for the same we can talk about that how they can also help with respect to development of Northeast region. Third is connecting resource rich region. Resource rich region where we have seen a certain accumulation of minerals such as Bihar, Jharkhand, they can be very well connected through inland waterways. Another point is with respect to Northeast development is East Act East policy and Northeast development, where we can connect already present development plans with inland waterways connectivity like Kalanandan projects. And lastly, unexplored potential of inland waterways. Over here, we can talk about that how there is possibility to create even further economic avenues through those unexplored potential of the inland waterways. So that is all for the prospect of body, which is in the heading 1. Let's talk about the challenges in heading 2, which is again a very explicit demand of the question. Challenges in developing inland waterways. Firstly, the biggest challenge and the hurdle is going to be the infrastructure development. As we do not have sufficient technological advancement as well as certain limitation with respect to the natural landscape, infrastructure development can become difficult. Second is with respect to outdated technology. Over here we have to look at the technology where we can create certain kind of infrastructure again. So that is again a linked point for the infrastructure challenges. The third point is with respect to environmental concern. We have seen variety of causes which can arise due to development of inland waterways, where certain regions can get directly affected ecologically. Fourth is with respect to regulatory complexity. Now again, there are multiple states involved in this inland waterway development, and because of the same, there are multiple regulatory norms that have to be followed, and thus there is a complex structure which can prove to be difficult for private entities as well as government entities to develop inland waterways. The next is with respect to maintenance and dredging of the inland waterways. Over here we have to understand that how they are very much dependent on the natural effects, and thus it becomes very difficult for controlling those parameters. Then we have interstate coordination. Again over here we have to understand that inland waterways, they form part of multiple states, and for the same there has to be certain degree of collaboration. We have seen so many conflicts with respect to river distribution and river sharing that can directly impact the interstate coordination. And lastly, investment needs, as the investment required for such kind of infrastructure development is humongous. So for the same, we have to understand that how there is need to be balance with respect to the capital need from government as well as from private entity. So that's all for the challenges for this body part. Let's move on to the conclusion of this answer. Now in the conclusion, you have the potential and the opportunity to talk about what exactly we can do to ensure those challenges are resolved. Firstly, we can talk about environmentally friendly dredging and navigation. We definitely looked around that how environmental concern as well as maintenance, they are crucial challenge with respect to development of inland waterways. So environmentally friendly dredging and navigation can definitely help resolve certain degree of those problems. Second is Sagarmala project for port and connectivity development. This kind of already set government initiative can be extended to this kind of projects and thereby inculcate variety of expertise from the same. Next is river information system and night navigation infrastructure. This can definitely provide certain degree of infrastructural support, at the same time certain degree of security for the transport. And lastly, policy measures for private sector participation. Over here we are looking at certain degree of capital inflow to ensure that the inland waterways are not just government sponsored projects but also have participation of private entities and thereby increase the PPP model, right? So this is something which we have to understand through conclusion. So that's all for question number 1. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide context as well as data points to substantiate the very first statement of the question. In the heading 1 of the body, you can provide the prospects, provide proof points along with substantiation. In the heading 2, you provide for the challenges, you list down the proof points along with the substantiation, and lastly in the conclusion, you can provide way forward. Now you do have to understand, you have to provide in the body total of 8 to 9 points for 10 marker. Now you have to be selective with respect to creating a balanced answer. You can create 4 points for heading 1 and 4 points for heading 2 over here. So that's how you can make sure your answer is balanced. So that's all for question number 1. Let's move on to question number 2. Let's read the question number 2 together. Electric vehicles are a constructive disruption in the automobile industry. What are the factors of location for setting up manufacturing units of electric vehicles in India? Now, if you read this question, you will understand the structure is very straightforward. The question is talking about how electric EV basically has disrupted the automobile sector, and for the same, if we want to establish manufacturing unit, how are we going to decide the location for the same? So this is a very straightforward resource and location based question. So in the introduction, you can provide certain context at how EV is disrupting the automobile sector, and in the transition line, you can go ahead with what are the benefits. In the benefit part, you will talk about what are the advantages of the EV, and then you can move on to the factors of location. So that's how you're going to structure the body aspect. In the conclusion, you can provide certain way ahead points, or you can also again reiterate the significance of EV for the nation. So that is how you can structure the question number 2 answer. Let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, you can provide certain context. You can talk about how climate change and energy security related issues have pushed nations towards creating certain kind of automobile industry which is sustainable in nature. For the same, EV sector has been proving as a very potential industry sector, and thus we can talk about that how it is very crucial for countries to adopt such kind of technology. You can also talk about certain data points that how it is going to be growing at a CAGR of 13.7%, and by 2030 it will be a almost $950 billion market. So that is something which you have to inculcate in your introduction. So this is something you can provide as a data point. But even that, I will definitely say that you can stick to the constructive disruption part and talk about it, how it can help with respect to tackling climate change or energy security related issues. So that is how you can start the introduction. In the body part, as we have to give certain substantiation for the disruption part, you can talk about the benefits of EVs. Firstly, it has lower running cost. Over here, we have seen that how in a long term, EVs have better efficiency, fuel and mileage compared to the fossil fuel variants. Second is with respect to low maintenance cost, as we have understood that the major component which is kind of significant are the batteries and the engines, whereas for the fossil fuel variant we have seen that how there are multiple maintenance issues related to the same. Lastly is zero tailpipe emissions. The biggest benefit is with respect to the pollution aspect, where EVs are very eco-friendly. And lastly, we have seen that how the countries are giving certain kind of tax benefits as well as subsidies which can again benefit customers as well as industry. So these are the kind of benefits of EV because of which it is disrupting the automobile sector. Let's move on to the heading 2, where we have to give detailed idea about the factors of location for EV manufacturing unit. Firstly, we have to understand it should be able to access raw materials like nickel, cobalt and lithium. So this is something which we have to understand, that access to raw material is very much like a primary need for an EV industry setup. Second, target market locations. Now we have seen that how urban spaces are very much convenient for nearby manufacturing unit, as most of the EV have range of 300 to 100 kilometers. So because of such kind of limitation, urban spaces can be beneficial markets. Third is availability of skilled labor. Now we have seen that how there are certain similarities with automobile sector, as in fossil fuel automobile sector and EV sector. So for the same, we have to also see similarity with respect to capturing the skilled labor for the industries. The next is government policies and incentives. Again, for the location, we have seen that how different states have been providing different kind of incentives to attract the investment for the EV sector, EV automobile manufacturing units, and thus this also plays crucial role for the factors of location. The next is agglomeration effect in industrial region. Already established automobile industrial sectors can help with respect to accessing skilled labor, capital, and raw material. And lastly, R&D, access to research and development with respect to the EV sector. The components of the same can also be beneficial for understanding the factors of location for EV manufacturing unit. So these are the kind of factors you can list down for the heading 2 of the body of question number 2. Let's move on to the conclusion, where you can talk about certain way ahead points. Over here you have the potential that how EV can change the way that we are perceiving the automobile sector and catapult us towards sustainable automobile sector. This is something you can inculcate over here. You can also talk about that how it will definitely help India to become a kind of place for investment and thereby research and development with respect to the latest technology of EV sector. So these are the kind of points that you can put down in conclusion. Let us see the model answer and understand how we will be inculcating the same in the answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide certain context. You can provide how EV is disrupting the automobile sector. Then you can list down the benefits, as in how it is basically disrupting. Then you can talk about the factors of location, which is a major demand of the question. And lastly, you can talk about that how it will help with respect to Atmanirbhar Bharat, as in sustainable automobile sector, at the same time providing certain investment, also research and development. So this is how you can inculcate your answer for question number 2. Let us move on to question number 3. Let's read the question number 3 together. Indian fisheries have witnessed a paradigm shift from marine dominated fisheries to inland fisheries. Explain. Mention the steps taken by government to promote fishery sector. Now, if you read this question, you will understand the structure is basically asking you that how exactly Indian fishery is now shifting towards inland fishery rather than marine dominated fishery, and what are the steps taken by government to promote fishery sector overall in the nation. So that's the kind of basic structure. In the introduction, you can start with what is basically the fishery sector, the current scenario of fishery sector in India, what are the trajectories that we are looking at. Basically, this is the part, the paradigm shift you can talk about, that how almost 70% of the fisheries is captured through inland fisheries. And then through the body, you can talk about why the paradigm shift is happening right now. And the next heading, you can talk about the steps taken by government. And lastly, you can talk about certain way ahead points. So that is how you're going to structure for question number 3. Let's start with the introduction. You can talk about certain recent news or context, where you can talk about that we have seen that almost 70% of the fisheries is captured by inland fisheries. You can also talk about certain points where you can talk about that marine dominated fisheries, which can be captured through our 7,500 kilometer long coastline. You can also talk about how India is the second largest producer of the fishery in the world after China. So these are the kind of proof points you can talk about to give idea about the fishery sector in India. Then you can transition to the reasons for basically this paradigm shift for marine dominated to inland fisheries. Now you can basically divide this into 2 subheadings: reasons for increase in share of inland fisheries and reason for decrease in marine fisheries. So you have to understand both cause and effect. Firstly, let's provide certain substantiation for the reason in increase in share of inland fisheries. Firstly, we have abundance of inland water resources. We are talking about rivers, we are talking about lakes, etc. So for the same, we have abundance of inland water resources that can definitely have certain advantage with respect to the accessibility towards those regions. The next is with respect to high population density along major rivers. Now, we have seen that how the urbanization process as well as major cities are located near the rivers, and that can provide a huge potential for the markets. The next is adoption of crop fishery system. Over here we are talking about how there is mixed hybrid farming going on, where farmers they have their crops, at the same time they are also engaged in fishery activities. So that is again an advantage for inland fisheries. And lastly, we have seen that how there is government support through schemes like Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, which again impacts the growth of inland fisheries. Now let's talk about the reasons for decrease in marine fisheries. Now that is again one of the reason, a major reason for transition. So let's see all the proof points. Firstly, lack of suitable fishing ground. As India do not have any spots where we can see cold and hot water, warm current mixing like Japan has. So that is something which we lack. So that is one of the reason for decrease in marine fishery. Second is difficulty in commercialization due to greater diversity of fishery. Now, as we are located in tropical region, we have diverse fishery in the marine places, and for the same, it becomes very difficult to engage in commercial activities because of such kind of diversity. Next is limited scope for expansion due to over exploitation. We have limited water resources and we have already exploited the territorial waters for fishery, and thus we have limited scope for expansion. Economic vulnerabilities of fishermen along the eastern coast. We have seen series of disaster related events like cyclone, etc., that again impacts the livelihood and potential of realizing the marine fishery. Next is environmental destruction from bottom trawlers. Now bottom trawlers have again over exploited the region, and thus there is also issue with respect to environmental destruction. And lastly is disputes with neighboring states impacting fisheries. We have historically seen there are issues, for example, issues with Sri Lanka, and that again impacts the decrease in marine fishery share. So these are the kind of proof points which you will be giving in reasons for transition. In the next heading, which is the steps taken by government, we can list down what are the steps that government has taken to ensure that the fishery sector is supported. Firstly, we have establishment of separate department of fishery. Now segregating department of fishery definitely provides certain kind of idea to the entire sector that government is very serious about development of this sector. Second is national fishery policies. Over here we have seen government's intent to make sure that there is infrastructure development, at the same time there is capacity building of the population engaged in this economic activity. Then we have again Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana to augment the production of fish. And next we have Fishery and Aquaculture Infrastructure Development Fund. Over here we can talk about that how infrastructure as a part of the fishery policy is given primary focus. Next is Rural Infrastructure Development Fund. Now we have to see that how rural development is also part of inland fishery water development. And lastly is extension of Kisan Credit Facility to fish farmer. This definitely helps with respect to the capital access issue. So these are the proof points that you can give for heading 2 of the question number 3's body. Let's go to the conclusion where you can talk about certain way ahead points. You can start with that almost 16 million population of the country is dependent on fishery activities, and thus government's push through variety of schemes is in alignment with the realization of livelihood for variety of population that is dependent on the fishery sector. So that is something you can inculcate in the conclusion of question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how can we inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. Firstly, in the introduction, you can provide certain context and you can provide that how there is a paradigm shift happening where inland water fisheries are given primary focus. You can provide certain kind of graphical understanding also. Then in the heading 1, you can provide reasons where you can subdivide, where you can talk about increase in inland fisheries as well as reasons for decrease in marine fisheries. And in the heading 2, you can talk about the steps taken by government, list down the steps along with the substantiation. And lastly, in the conclusion, you can provide how fishery sectors is very crucial for livelihood of variety of population, and thus conclude your answer. So that's all for today's session. But still, let's continue and understand how exactly we are going to go ahead, as today is the last session for answer writing program 2023-24. But that doesn't mean that we are going to stop. Post prelims, we will be again restarting this program with better understanding of answer writing strategies as well as questions that can definitely help you cracking the mains examination. So this is something that you have to understand, that this is the phase where you have to focus on prelims So it's best to switch gears right now and work on your prelims strategy. Post that, we will talk about the mains. So do understand, post prelims you can start revising all the answer writing sessions that have already happened and understand how we can easily create certain kind of templates and structures for GS specific answers. And then we will continue again with our answer writing program 2024-25 for the upcoming mains and subsequently. So that's all for today's session. Keep writing and thank you so much, and I hope you all the best for your prelims examination.